Most people picture the Bible as a closed book, definitive, complete, self-contained. The truth is something else entirely. Buried within the sacred text itself are direct references to at least 20 works that no one can read anymore. Specific citations, proper names, lost chapters. This is the story no one told you. Consider the scene. You are reading the book of Joshua, chapter 10, verse 13. The sun stops in the sky over Gibeon, and the biblical text, without any warning, pauses to cite a source that no reader of the modern era has ever been able to locate again. Is not this written in the book of Joshua? The sentence appears without preamble, as if it were obvious, as if any reader of that era knew exactly what it referred to. That book no longer exists. No complete known copy survived the following 3,000 years, and yet the biblical text you hold in your hands confirms, without hesitation, that the lost work was real, was in active circulation, and was considered reliable enough to serve as a historical reference. The prophet Samuel wrote his own book that also vanished. And in 1947, a Bedouin threw a stone into a cave and completely changed what researchers believed they knew about these disappeared works. Consider the full scale of it. This is not a single isolated reference. There are at least 20 clear mentions of texts now lost, scattered across books like Numbers, Joshua, 2 Samuel, 1 Kings, 2 Kings, 1 Chronicles, and 2 Chronicles. 586 years before Christ, Jerusalem was seized by the Babylonians. The Temple of Solomon was reduced to rubble. Entire libraries of parchment and scrolls burned. And among the works lost in that devastating fire, according to tradition, preserved by historians like Flavius Josephus, were the diaries of prophets, official records of kings, and detailed annals of military campaigns. The Hebrew Bible, surviving, kept the references intact. It did not remove the citations. It did not erase the mentions. It preserved the names of those dead books like textual scars. But the most uncomfortable case of all has yet to be revealed. In Numbers, chapter 21, verse 14, an even older reference appears. The text cites the Book of the Wars of the Lord, and it literally quotes a passage of poetry from that work. Verses about Waheb in Sufa, about the ravines of the Arnon, about the borders of Moab. No archaeologist, no historian, no rabbinical school has ever managed to reconstruct that book. Only those isolated fragments remain, suspended in the middle of the biblical text, like ruins of a city that no one can find on any map. Scholars estimate the original work contained several hundred verses. Researchers like Frank Cross of Harvard University suggested during the 1970s that it was a poetic compilation of battle songs from the period of the Exodus, around 1400 before Christ. Perhaps earlier, no one knows for certain. Silence. The documentary truth is this: the Book of the Wars of the Lord may have been the oldest written document in Hebrew literature, and it vanished completely. Now consider the sheer quantity. In 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 29, the sacred author closes the life of King David by directing the reader toward other sources. 3 specific works: the Acts of Samuel the seer, the Acts of Nathan the prophet, the Acts of Gad the seer. Think about the weight of that. Samuel, the prophet who anointed Saul and David, who guided Israel from the era of the judges into the era of the monarchy, wrote his own book about the deeds of David. That book existed. The chronicler of the Hebrew Bible confirms its existence, and it was not preserved. No copy, no fragment, no secondary reference survived intact. Look closely at what that means. The author of the Book of Chronicles, writing probably between 450 and 350 before Christ, still had access to these works. He consulted them. He cited them as complementary sources. A few generations later, during the Hellenistic period, as Alexander the Great swept through the eastern Mediterranean around 330 before Christ, these documents began disappearing from the inventory lists of known libraries. And when the Roman Empire destroyed the Second Temple in 70 after Christ, under the command of General Titus, everything that still remained burned along with Jerusalem. Calculate the magnitude of the lost labor. Each of those ancient books was written by hand on scrolls of parchment or papyrus. A trained scribe of the pre-exilic era spent between 18 and 24 months copying a single treatise of average length. The process required special ink made from soot mixed with plant gum. It required quills sharpened with surgical precision. It required scrolls cured from the hides of approximately 30 adult goats for each longer text. And it required absolute silence, ritualistic fasting, and triple review of every single word. When a single copying error was detected, the entire parchment could be discarded. Years of labor undone by a single transposed letter. The lives of scribes were marked by chronic back pain, severe vision problems starting around age 40, deep calluses on the fingers of the right hand, and respiratory diseases caused by the constant inhalation of dust from treated leather. Many died before 50. Entire generations devoted to a single occupation, ensuring that sacred words survived through time. And even with all that devotion, at least 20 works still disappeared. From the outside, the Bible looks like a book complete in itself. From the inside, it carries textual gaps like craters. Every lost reference is a reminder. Every citation without a retrievable source is a scar. Examine the details of the book of Jasher. The Hebrew word yashar means the upright or the righteous. It was a poetic collection documenting the heroic deeds of Israel's history. In Joshua chapter 10, verse 13, the work is cited to confirm the event of the sun standing still over Gibeon. In 2 Samuel chapter 1, verses 17 through 27, the book reappears as the source for David's lament over the deaths of Saul and Jonathan. There is even the famous Song of the Bow preserved within that lament, one of the oldest poetic texts in the entire Old Testament. But the book of Jasher as a complete work, with its full original scope, simply vanished. Follow what happened in the centuries that followed. Around 1200 after Christ, a version written in Hebrew appeared in medieval Europe that claimed to be the original book of Jasher. Modern scholars like Joseph Dan of the Hebrew University of Jerusalem have demonstrated that this medieval version was a later composition, possibly from the 11th or 12th century, written by an anonymous Jewish author who attempted to reconstruct from oral traditions and midrashic fragments the presumed contents of the lost work. It is not the original book, it is a late attempt. A reconstruction based on collective memory, not on direct copying. Witness now the sequence of catastrophes that erased these texts. First destruction, 586 before Christ. The Babylonian king Nebuchadnezzar besieges Jerusalem for 18 months. The population dies of starvation inside the walls. The cisterns run dry, the grain stores are exhausted, and when the city finally falls, the Temple of Solomon, built with tons of gold according to estimates based on 1 Kings chapters 6 and 7, is set ablaze. The annexed libraries, maintained by the Levitical priests, burn with it. Scrolls stored in clay jars are consumed, others are stolen as plunder, others vanish in the chaos of exile, and that is only the beginning. Second destruction, 70 after Christ. The Roman legions under General Titus besieged Jerusalem for 4.5 months. It is estimated that between 600,000 and 1,100,000 inhabitants died during the siege and the fall of the city. The Second Temple, rebuilt by Herod the Great over 46 years of massive construction, is leveled. The fires burned for days. Everything that still remained of the temple libraries was gone. The historian Flavius Josephus, an eyewitness to the siege, describes in his work The Jewish War how precious parchments were used as fuel by Roman soldiers during cold nights. Third destruction. It begins in 1208, when Pope Innocent III authorizes the Albigensian Crusade. But the decisive loss comes in 1242 in Paris. By order of Louis IX, known as Saint Louis, 24 cartloads of Talmudic and rabbinical manuscripts are publicly burned in the Place de Grève. It is estimated that between 10,000 and 12,000 parchments burned on that single day. Among them, possibly, partial copies or commentaries on works cited by the Bible that had no equivalent in the Christian libraries of the era. The history of loss was not an event. It was a process 1,800 years long. Place what survived in perspective. In 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 41, the author closes the biography of Solomon with the phrase, "And the rest of the acts of Solomon, and all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon?" That book existed. The biblical author explicitly cites it. Solomon reigned for approximately 40 years, between 970 and 930 before Christ. He built the temple. He established trade routes with Tarshish and Ophir. He received the Queen of Sheba. He wrote, according to tradition, 3,000 proverbs and 1,005 songs. And yet the official book of his deeds vanished. What remains is only the shadow of the book, the mention of the book, the scar of the book. But what archaeologists found in the mid-20th century was something different. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd named Muhammad ed-Dib was searching for a lost goat along the cliffs near the Dead Sea. When he threw a stone into a dark cave, he heard the sound of a clay jar breaking. That chance discovery resulted in the greatest archaeological find of the century, the Dead Sea Scrolls. Approximately 972 scrolls and fragments recovered over a decade of excavations in the caves of Qumran. Dated between 250 before Christ and 70 after Christ. Among those fragments, scholars like Geza Vermes and Frank Cross identified short passages that might correspond to some of the lost works cited by the Bible, pieces of what was perhaps a primitive version of archaic songs, isolated lines that reproduced, with minor variations, the poetry of the Book of the Wars of the Lord. No complete reconstruction was possible, but for the first time in nearly 2,000 years, textual fragments allowed scholars to speculate about what those works actually contained. Examine the case of the Book of Enoch. Here the story takes an even more uncomfortable turn. The patriarch Enoch, seventh descendant of Adam, receives only a few verses in Genesis chapter 5. He is said to have lived 365 years before being taken by God, and that is all. Yet in the New Testament, in the Epistle of Jude, verses 14 and 15, the author literally quotes a prophecy attributed to Enoch. The citation reproduces almost word for word a passage from the Book of Enoch, an extensive work with 108 chapters that details the fall of the watcher angels, the vision of celestial thrones, and the final judgment. The Book of Enoch was considered canonical for centuries by the Ethiopian Church, but it was excluded from the Hebrew canon after the Council of Jamnia, around 90 after Christ, and excluded from the Western Christian canon during the debates of the 4th and 5th centuries. For more than 1,000 years, the Book of Enoch was considered lost within the European tradition. Scholars believed only isolated fragments survived in ancient commentaries. In 1773, the Scottish explorer James Bruce returned from Ethiopia carrying 3 complete copies of the book, written in Ge'ez, the liturgical language of Ethiopia. That surviving text proved that the author of the Epistle of Jude in the 1st century of the Christian era knew a work that the rest of the world would take nearly 2 millennia to rediscover. The Bible cited a lost book, and the book was found. The Bible cited 20 other lost books, and none of them were found. Consider the particular case of the prophetic documentarians. In 2 Chronicles chapter 9, verse 29, the author mentions 3 sources for the life of Solomon beyond the book of the Acts: the words of Nathan the prophet, the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite, and the visions of Iddo the seer. 3 independent works, 3 different authors, 3 contemporary witnesses to the events of Solomon's reign. None survived. In 2 Chronicles chapter 12, verse 15, another reference appears: the histories of Shemaiah the prophet and of Iddo the seer, dealing with genealogies. A specific book of genealogies vanished today. In 2 Chronicles chapter 13, verse 22, the commentary of the prophet Iddo, another lost work. In 2 Chronicles chapter 20, verse 34, the Acts of Jehu the son of Hanani, which are inserted in the Book of the Kings of Israel. And the Book of the Kings of Israel mentioned there is not the biblical book you know as 1st and 2nd Kings. It is a parallel, more extensive work, cited as a source. Also gone. Think about the proportion of what was lost. For every biblical book that survived, at least one complementary source was destroyed. The Bible you read today is a summary, a synthesis, a final distillation made by the sacred authors from libraries that no longer exist. The chronicler wrote while seated before open parchments. He consulted them, compared them, selected from them, and whatever was left outside the canonical text was lost, along with the sources that were consulted. Consider the daily effort of those chroniclers. A scribe of the Persian period, working by natural light through shifts of 10 to 12 hours, could produce between 200 and 300 words of legible text per day. Every word required verification. Every proper name was checked against parallel sources. Every number was confirmed across multiple lists. An entire biblical book, like 2 Chronicles, with approximately 23,000 words in the original Hebrew, required between 3 and 4 years of continuous work from a single trained scribe. And while that scribe worked, the sources being consulted were already beginning to deteriorate. From within, the parchment suffered constant assault: moths, mold, rodents, shifts in humidity, accidental fires, lootings. Every extra drop of moisture rotted the treated skin. Every change in temperature cracked the plant fibers. The temple libraries were protected by specialized priests who maintained a rotating system of monthly inspection. They checked each scroll, marked damage, initiated emergency copies when the original was on the verge of disintegrating. And still, most of the works did not survive. Consider the case of the Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel and the Book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah, cited more than 30 times throughout 1st and 2nd Kings. These 2 works were official administrative records maintained in the royal courts of Samaria and Jerusalem between approximately 930 and 586 before Christ. They contained daily information about the reign of each monarch, tributes collected, treaties signed, military campaigns, public construction projects. When the northern kingdom fell to Assyria in 722 before Christ, the royal chronicles of Israel were destroyed or taken as plunder. They never reappeared. When the southern kingdom fell to Babylon in 586 before Christ, the royal chronicles of Judah met the same fate. No engineer calculated this, but the historical result was devastating. Researchers like Israel Finkelstein of Tel Aviv University estimate that between 70 and 80% of the administrative memory of the Hebrew monarchical period was lost within that 2-century interval. The biblical text preserved only a summary of summaries, a synthesis of syntheses. Place this in the perspective of the work done by later rabbis. Between the 2nd and 5th centuries after Christ, Jewish sages scattered throughout Galilee, Babylonia, and North Africa attempted to reconstruct through midrashic commentaries part of the lost content. They compiled oral traditions, cited passages from memory, recorded fragments preserved in ancient sayings. That enormous effort resulted in works like the Babylonian Talmud, finalized around 500 after Christ, with approximately 2.5 million words. But not even the entire Talmud managed to recover the original books cited by the Old Testament. It managed only to preserve the shadow of those works. The system functioned for centuries, and still, it was not enough. Think about the theological peculiarities of the subject. When the Bible cites a lost book, the modern reader tends to react with unease, because it seems to suggest a fragility in the sacred text, an incompleteness, a gap that should not exist in a book considered inspired by God. But careful reading reveals something else entirely. The references to lost books are, in fact, marks of textual honesty. The biblical author did not hide his sources. He did not erase the footprints of the parchments he consulted. He preserved the names of those works as an acknowledgement of a tradition that preceded him. The Bible thus reveals itself as more transparent than most contemporary ancient texts. And then nature struck back. Climates changed. Entire libraries crumbled under moisture. Roman Egypt, during the following centuries, lost the famous Library of Alexandria in a sequence of fires in 48 before Christ during Julius Caesar's siege, in 272 after Christ during the Palmyrene revolt of Zenobia, and again in 391 after Christ under the edict of Emperor Theodosius I against pagan temples. It is estimated that approximately 40,000 to 70,000 scrolls were lost in the initial destruction alone. Among them possibly copies of works cited by the Bible that had been deposited there by Alexandrian Jews at the time of the Septuagint translation, around 280 before Christ. Note the strangeness of the detail. The Septuagint translation was made precisely in Alexandria, under the patronage of Ptolemy II Philadelphus. 70 Jewish translators worked, according to tradition, isolated in separate cells. Each one produced an integral translation of the Old Testament into Greek. When they compared their texts, the translations were identical, or so the legend holds. The real history is that monumental effort also had access to Hebrew sources that no longer circulated in Palestine. Some of those sources may have been the lost works, and they burned along with the library. Follow the paradoxical case of the Book of Jasher. In 1840, an English editor named Mordecai Manuel Noah published in New York an English translation of that medieval reconstructed version of the Book of Jasher. The work circulated widely among Christian and Jewish communities in the United States throughout the 19th century. To this day, there are readers who take that edition to be authentic. Serious scholars, however, dismiss that identification almost unanimously. The true Book of Jasher, the original book cited by Joshua and by 2 Samuel, remains lost, and it remains lost for a specific reason. Not because no one searched for it, but because the quantity of time, heat, humidity, fungus, and destructive fire accumulated over 3,000 years, eliminated any statistical chance of survival for a document of that nature, maintained under uncontrolled conditions. The Dead Sea Scrolls survived because they were sealed inside clay jars within caves of constant temperature and extremely low humidity. They were protected by rare geography, by archaeological luck, by accidental preservation. Most ancient parchments received a far less generous fate. Place this in final perspective. When the Bible cites a lost book, it hands you a window into something larger than the surviving text. It shows you that those sacred authors consulted sources, trusted earlier testimonies, built their narratives on the backs of entire generations of chroniclers, prophets, and poets whose own voices were silenced by time. Every lost reference is a reminder of how much human labor was expended to preserve the memory of a people. And how much of that labor was lost regardless? What remains of the Bible you read today is the final summary: 66 books in the Protestant canon, 73 in the Catholic canon, 78 in the Eastern Orthodox canon, 81 in the Ethiopian Orthodox canon. Each tradition preserved a slightly different set, and even in the broadest tradition, those 20 lost books remain outside, inaccessible, dead, visible only by the textual scars they left behind inside the canon. What survived did not survive by accident. It survived because generations of scribes, monks, rabbis, and copyists dedicated their entire lives to duplicating, checking, and protecting parchments against fires, invasions, and centuries of political instability. What was not lost because it was less important. It was lost because at some point, the human chain of copying was broken by a catastrophe that no one managed to foresee or prevent. The Bible preserved the names of those dead books precisely to remind us that the transmission of sacred memory was never simple, never automatic, and never guaranteed. The text you read today, complete and available on your shelf, is the result of a 3,000-year race against forgetting, and 20 runners fell along the way. The Bible cited a book that no one can read anymore. But as long as the citation exists within the pages that survived, the lost book will never have been entirely forgotten.